Welcome to Sleepy History Tales. Tonight, we are traveling back to the Middle Ages, where life was harsh, money was scarce, and survival often depended on the simplest of exchanges. Instead of coins jingling in pockets, many people were paid in food and drink. And in some of the most curious cases, entire jobs were compensated, not with silver or gold, but with beer and bread. Tonight, we will explore those forgotten occupations, step into the muddy shoes of medieval workers, and drift slowly into a world where survival was measured in loaves and mugs. Settle down, breathe deeply, and let this story lead you toward rest. Life in medieval Europe was shaped by scarcity. For peasants and laborers, coins were rare and precious. The lords, who controlled the land, often had little need to hand out cash. Instead, they paid workers with what mattered most: food. Bread was the foundation of the medieval diet, and beer was safer to drink than water. Together, they became not only nourishment, but currency. Imagine finishing a day's work, not with money in your hand, but with a hunk of coarse brown bread and a mug of warm, foamy ale. One of the most infamous jobs that earned such pay was that of the Gong farmer. A Gong farmer's task was one of the foulest imaginable: cleaning cesspits, privies, and latrines. In the dead of night, when the streets were quiet, they descended into the pits of human waste, shoveling and carrying it away to the fields outside the town. For their labors, they might be given meals, ale, and sometimes a place to sleep. Few people wanted the job, yet it was essential. Without Gong farmers, medieval towns would drown in their own filth. Their pay was not glamorous, but bread and beer meant life, and life was enough. There were also rat catchers, men hired to chase vermin out of homes, barns, and bakeries. Rats were everywhere in the Middle Ages, carrying fleas, spreading disease, and devouring food stores. Catchers worked with dogs, traps, or even their bare hands. They were not paid in coins, but in the very food they protected. Loaves of bread, mugs of beer, or a warm stew were common rewards. The work was dangerous and dirty, but it kept bellies full and communities grateful. Another curious job was that of the plague watcher. During outbreaks of the Black Death, whole neighborhoods were sealed off. Guards, often poor men desperate for any pay, were stationed outside infected homes to prevent people from leaving. Their wages were small, sometimes only a loaf of bread and a measure of beer each day. They lived in constant fear, watching the sick from a distance and hoping that disease would not creep into their own bodies. Payment was meager, but to the starving, it was better than nothing. In rural areas, farmhands and shepherds were also often paid, partly in food. A farmer might promise his workers daily bread, a portion of cheese, and a jug of ale during the harvest season. For many peasants, this was more valuable than money they could not spend in distant markets. Food kept them alive, while coins might never leave their pockets. At harvest feasts, laborers would drink heartily, their wages foaming in their cups. Beer itself was not just a drink, but a lifeline. Water from rivers and wells was often unsafe, carrying disease. Ale, brewed with grains and boiled during preparation, was safer to consume. Even children drank weak ale with their meals. So, when a worker was paid with beer, it was not simply a luxury, it was survival. A pint of beer was a pint of clean, filling liquid, carrying calories and warmth into tired bodies. Bread, too, was more than food. It was the core of every meal, eaten at every time of day. Dark rye bread, barley loaves, or coarse wheat bread filled the stomach when little else could. In many villages, bread and ale was not just payment, it was the rhythm of life. To work for bread and beer was to work for existence itself. Some of the strangest jobs paid this way were connected to death. Gravediggers, often called upon during epidemics, were compensated with food and drink more than money. A hot loaf and a jug of ale were given after long hours of digging in frozen ground. For the church, food was cheaper than coin, and for the digger, warmth in the belly was more immediate than wealth in a purse. The work was grim, but bread and beer softened its bitterness. Even the church used bread and ale as payment. Monasteries relied on lay workers to tend fields, herd animals, and brew beer. In exchange, these workers received meals from the monastery kitchens. Warm bread, bowls of stew, and strong ale were their wages. Some even considered it a blessing, for they dined better than many free peasants outside the monastery walls. Imagine the daily routine of one such worker. You rise before dawn, your stomach empty. The air is cold, and frost lies on the grass. You labor for hours hauling wood, tending fields, scrubbing floors. At midday, your master hands you a hunk of bread, dense and chewy, with a mug of ale that warms your chest. It is not much, but it is enough to keep your muscles moving until nightfall. After work, you are tired, dirty, but fed. This was payment enough for most, and it tied workers to their masters as firmly as any coin. For many, bread and beer were more reliable than money. Coins could be withheld, lost, or stolen, but food was immediate. Bread filled the belly. Beer eased thirst and softened the edge of hardship. In a way, it was the most practical form of currency in a world where hunger was always near. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine yourself in those times. Picture the smoky cottages, the crowded fields, the stench of cesspits, and the laughter of workers feasting at the end of the day. Payment was not riches, not jewels, not even coins, but the humble comfort of bread and beer. These were the true wages of survival in the Middle Ages. So, as you rest beneath your blankets, with food secure and warmth close at hand, be grateful, for in another time, your life might have been measured in crusts and cups, in loaves and mugs, in bread and beer. Sleep well, and let history remind you how far we have come, and how simple survival once was.